radio. Yeah. We also have Prof. William Barboatin, who is also a senior lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Ghana. Prof, if you can give us a round of applause for Prof too. We also have in our midst Dr. Nanekria Anyidoho, who is a senior research fellow at ISE, University of Ghana, Legon. Prof, Doc. Okay. We also have in our midst, who is also a panelist, Mrs. Teodoro Williams, Auntie, Programs Manager for FOSDA. Can you give us a wave too? We also have Mr. Prosper Hoitu, who is the Executive Director, Youth Network for Human Rights and Democracy. Prosper, if you are here. Well, Prosper was on Radio 3FM earlier on this morning, so he's in the building. And we also have in our midst our very own, the Executive Director of Yes Ghana, Mr. Emmanuel Eduji. In our midst today, we also have Mr. Kojo Sedega. Mr. Kojo Sedega from the UNDP in our midst. A round of applause for Mr. Sedega. And in our midst today, we are also joined by our able youth researchers. We call them youth researchers. They are behind all the work, what has brought us here today, which is the People's National Youth Policy. Please, the youth researchers, can you please stand up so we give you a round of applause? Please, we can do better for the young researchers. We have also in our midst our friends and brothers and sisters from civil society organizations, from senior high schools, and a whole lot. I mean, general public, very enthusiastic and dynamic young people who want to be part of this discourse. You are all most welcome, and we hope that we are going to have a very successful event. Please, just to remind you again, the hashtag for this event is YP Dialogue. So please, you can tweet, share on Facebook, and comment so that others who are not here can follow the program.
So we started the process by putting together a broad constituency of young people across the country, some of whom are represented here this morning, to lead the process. Then we organized a series of capacity building activities, workshops, trainings, field work, and social media activities that helped these young people, at least the leaders, who then carried it forward to their local groups in the communities, to be able to conduct what we call youth action research, which does not always deploy the known scientific empirical research per se, but which is action research or participatory research is recognized to be a useful methodology, and we have so many professors here, I have to be careful what I say about research. It's a useful methodology for especially civil society to collect information in a very participatory way, but useful as well, in order to bring on board the voices of the very grassroots. And then we had a writing and coordination task force that enabled us to do the actual decisions around how is this document going to look like, how is it going to be written, who is going to compile what, and so on. So based on these set of activities and training, we deployed 30 young people to their communities to train, their groups. And based on the work they have done at the local level, they were able to come back with inputs to the next workshop that we organized, which was the data analysis workshop. Well, once they brought these, we prepared what we call thematic summaries, and this was in Cape Coast. We did this by just picking the raw information that came and saying, what is this young person saying? Well, this looks like a health-related issue. This looks like an education-related issue. And we were able to use that clustering approach to organize the information that came into about 12 thematic areas. We drew these 12 thematic areas from globally and regionally recognized, but also national youth policy recognized thematic areas. So if you take, for example, the World Programme of Action for Youth of the UN, and then the African Youth Charter, but our own Ghanaian national youth policy, you would see some of these thematic areas cutting across. And then finally, we put the drafts, at least 3 different drafts of the same document, because we kept receiving inputs from young people, experts, and we are grateful to the few technocrats and UN staff, people like Mr. Kojo Sedega here, who helped us to make the document more solid and acceptable, especially by the policy community. So how is the policy organized? First, the People's National Youth Policy makes the case for why a national youth policy is necessary. This is not because we don't know, it's just to remind us, because our governments, who are the decision makers, sometimes almost seem like they need some reminders. Then we moved on to do a brief description or a discussion on the history of, or the state of youth policy in Ghana. And if you listen to 3FM this morning, I think Prosper Hoitu and Shamima just finished it. But I'll remind you in a few minutes. I've never met Shamima. It's my first time. But Prosper is a good friend. But when they were speaking, I just felt like they wrote my presentation for me, because they were just speaking the exact truth. And then thirdly, we included in here something that we did not write, but it's from the first Global Youth Policy Forum, which was held in Azerbaijan, to look at, building a global community around youth policies. And they came up with some really useful principles that guide national youth policy development and implementation. So a national youth policy fit for purpose. What are the requirements or the principles that make a national youth policy fit for purpose? And then we move to the meat proper, which is what we have found from the field, and that's the policy proposals that young people are making. And finally, we included a section that talked about a collaborative effort between partners, recognizing that this whole youth policy thing is not a one-party matter. It has to be done within a community of practice. So let me just quickly rush this through in terms of the case for national youth policy. I think there are at least 1,000 reasons why every government needs a national youth policy. If you see the number of policies we churn out in this country, you would agree that it seems that we know that policy is necessary. I think we only don't do policy well when it comes to youth issues, youth and children maybe. But the first argument is the demographic argument. And I don't need to belabor that point. Young people, it doesn't matter what age group you take, because people take 15 to 24, others 15 to 35. Sometimes we just loosely say young people below the age of 25. Of course, Professor Bob Watting was just telling me this morning we have to be careful the way we throw data around. But whatever figures you use, young people remain the largest cohort in most of our country's populations, and Ghana is not an exception. If you use 15 to about 35, young people constitute about a third of the population. I think Ghana is now heading towards about a population of 27, 28 million, maybe. Who are the experts here? So you can work out a third of that. But in terms of assets, if you consider the economic value of the energies, the exuberance, the efforts of young people, and especially in a world such as we are in now, where young people drive technology, young people drive innovation. Show me a sector, media, anything. Young people are at the forefront of it, even maybe politics very soon. And so that argument where in the past adults and people who felt they were older based on certain cultural perceptions led processes of youth seems to be fading. We need to fade it out and see young people as the nation's greatest asset. And then, of course, there is global acceptance of the importance of investing in young people. And of course, if we say that we are running a country that everyone is involved, then I believe that young people making or constituting the largest cohort should definitely be part of the national cake. We always say it's national cake. It's not. It's something that we should all keep our eye on. And there are more, if I just do a show of hand for people to give more reasons why national youth policy is important, I'm sure we'll get at least 20 extra reasons. So let's leave that and come to the state or a little brief history about youth policy and programming in Ghana. In other words, what have we done for youth in Ghana? Unfortunately, there's not much we can say in terms of policy from independence. We can say in terms of programs, so Operation Feed Yourself, I think Kwame Nkrumah has the Young Brigades. We don't want to go there right now. But when it comes to policy, in terms of someone putting together a coherent document that lays out a political agenda, an economic agenda, and a social agenda for youth, discussions only started in about 1993. And by 1999, we had a first draft of what would be called Ghana's first national youth policy. But hold on, it was never passed, it was never adopted, although it was printed nicely and everything in 1999. But unfortunately, before the government could pass it in 99, they lost the election. And so we had a new government in 2001. And I believe this is where our sister Shamima, Prosper, and I'm sure a few other people in this room picked up from that process to try and see how the new government then, in 2001, could push through. Luckily and fortunately, that government, President Kufuor's government, provided the opportunity for that dialogue to go on. Was it deep enough? Was it open enough? Maybe not, but at least we had the opportunity to have the back and forth and the conversations. But the weakness in that process was that we spent the entire 8 years of that government reviewing the policy, and we never passed it. And so a new government came in 2009, and unfortunately just towed the same path for 2 years and said that they too needed to review the same document that has already been reviewed for 8 years. And so, well, another round of meetings and processes that we can remember clearly. And in 2010, we got our first national youth policy. Now, that policy was not bad at all, especially for the fact that for the first time in Ghana's history, a government was able to, launch a policy, because when you launch the policy, you'll be held accountable to it. It's one of the reasons governments shy away from that process. And so we commended the government, but unfortunately, in 2018, January, we can look back and almost say that that policy was not necessarily implemented to the fullest. We cannot see any evidence of the implementation of our only national youth policy that was launched in 2010. And among young people, there is very little awareness of what is in that policy. And I explained earlier that this was because young people themselves were not fully involved in the process. So we are running a 10-year, almost a 10-year cycle, 93, 99, 2010. And then fortunately in December 2017, just a month ago, government made an announcement that it was going to review national youth policy. And for us, that was welcome news. So that, I don't know if it's a good overview of where we are in terms of national youth policy. But the one controlling the PowerPoint, can you just roll all the bullets on this screen, on this slide? And I won't go over it. These are some of the major government projects that have been, what's going on? That have been initiated in Ghana since then, since 2001, without necessarily having a national youth policy. So unfortunately, my time is up. Is it up or do I have? It's up. Okay. So unfortunately, my time is up. We're live on radio, so we can't go ahead. We will circulate this presentation for those who have registered with their emails. And what is left that we haven't said is that whole discussion about a national youth policy fit for purpose. What are the principles that make a policy worthwhile? And finally, the proposals, the youth policy proposals that came from the field as contained in the People's National Youth Policy. Thank you very much, and I wish you a healthy dialogue. Thank you.
Please, another round of applause for Emmanuel. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Just a reminder that this event is being carried live on 3FM, and also to remind you to the hashtag is hashtag YP Dialogue, and you can follow us on all of our social media platforms, which will be projected for everybody to see. I believe Emmanuel has set the tone for the discussions and for the discussions to continue. So without wasting much time, I would like to hand over to Sister Shamima Muslim to moderate the panel discussion. A round of applause for Shamima Muslim.
Good morning. Good morning. Let's get up and sing the National Youth Anthem. Arise, Ghana youth, for your country. The nation demands your devotion. Let us all unite to uphold her and make her great and strong. We are all involved. We are all involved. We are all involved in building our motherland. Let's clap for ourselves. Right. Thank you very much for that. I used to be a very passionate youth advocate. I still am, so I was just trying to think about and remember the old days. So it's really, really a pleasure to have to moderate this very, very important conversation. We are live on 3FM 92.7, that is, and this is the National Youth Policy Dialogue by YES and Voices of the Youth with support from the Commonwealth Foundation. Let me first of all invite to stage the panelists who will be helping us have this conversation this morning. I am happy to invite on stage Mr. Ransford, Doctor, I beg your pardon, Ransford Edward Jampo. He's actually an associate professor, Department of Political Science of the University of Ghana. A round of applause. Now, Professor Jampo is an astute political scientist. Just yesterday, he ruffled the feathers of some media people, but we'll save him for today. He said we didn't ask very smart questions. Right. So he teaches he's an associate professor of political science at the Department of Political Science of the University of Ghana. He's also the director of the Center for European Studies at the same university. He's been a visiting scholar at the University of South Florida since 2012. In addition, he is a senior research fellow at the Governance Unit of the Institute of Economic Affairs and has led several research projects and played a key role in the IEA Socioeconomic and Governance Survey. He holds a PhD in political science from the University of Ghana and a Tufts University in Boston, USA. His research interest lies in the area of youth empowerment and participation, general issues of governance, democracy, human rights, and development. He is currently researching on writing on youth participation and development in Ghana's Fourth Republic. Another round of applause for him. Next on the panel is Teodoro Williams' auntie. Let's welcome her with a round of applause. We are a gender-sensitive organization. She is the programs manager at FOSDA, and it's a youth and security development association. She's very passionate about development. She's a development practitioner. She's a youth development activist, a gender equality advocate, and development project implementation expert. She holds a Master in Public Affairs from the University of Ghana. She is passionate about development and aspires each day to contribute to making Ghana and Africa a better place with opportunities for all to achieve. Another round of applause for our next guest. My own professor of economics, but I ran away from economics. Professor William Boateng is next. He is an associate professor, Department of Economics, University of Ghana. Let's welcome him with a round of applause. But this is one of his many hats. He wears several others. He holds a PhD in economics and an associate professor at the Department of Economics of the University of Ghana with particular research and teaching focus on economics of the labor market and labor market institutions, education and skills development, gender in the labor market, poverty and livelihood analysis, small-scale enterprise development, and development economics. He is also a fellow of the International Institute of Advanced Studies in Accra. He studied at the University of Ghana and Harvard University and is one of the editors of the Ghana Journal of Economics. He was an Ella Barth visiting professor at the ICDD of the University of Kassel in Germany between October 2015 and February 2016, and won a senior research fellowship at Harvard University Center for Africa Studies as part of the 2-year sabbatical leave granted him by the University of Ghana. He's worked for Africa Center of Economic Transformation based in Accra as a senior research fellow, and many others. He currently consults for World Bank, Africa Development Bank, International Labour Organization, Finance and Labour Ministry, NDPC, and he actually has to be at NDPC as we speak. So somewhere along the line, we would have to excuse him because he really has to go and do his duty to Mother Ghana. He has over 50 publications in the form of books and edited books, book chapters, journal articles. Let's give him another round of applause. Our final panelist for this morning is Dr. Nana Ekia Anidoho. She is a research fellow at ESA at the University of Ghana, Legon. Let's give her a round of applause. Legon is very much represented this morning, Andy. UCC, where are you? There's only 2 universities in Ghana, University of Ghana and all the others. Dr. Anyidoho is a senior research fellow at the Institute of Statistical, Social, and Economic Research at the University of Ghana. She is interested on the ways social policy impacts the life of young people, with focus on employment and education. She has researched young people's work aspirations, university students' transitions into the labor market, and youth policy narratives. Dr. Anyidoho has a BA in psychology from the University of Ghana and a PhD in human development and social policy from Northwestern University. She is currently president of the Ghana Studies Association. Let's give a very warm round of applause for all our guests this morning. Okay. Before we come to our guests, we want to quickly have a brief session on what young people are saying their challenges are. You know, we've been speaking about this top-to-bottom approach to development, and we're saying that young people feel they are not integrated enough, and they don't take part in decision-making. So the research assistants that we heard earlier from went to the field and spoke to young people. So their realities are reflected in the document that we'll be discussing. We want to hear from them what they found to be the key challenges that young people face. So researchers, it's up to you now to quickly tell us briefly, succinctly, some of the major challenges. Do we have another mic? Another mic that these young people are faced with. Then we'll come to you, the audience. You're here because you have some ideas. We want to also speak to you before we come to our experts, to be sure that our experts are reflecting our reality. I think that is fair. So who wants to go? The researchers, quickly. You've done this work already, so just be able to tell us.
Okay, thank you very much.
Maybe you mention your name and where you conducted your research.
Yes.
My name is Ebenezer Nimati, and I conducted my research in KNUST, specifically among teaching and research assistants. And their major concern was to do with education and the fact that it becomes very difficult for young people to afford education in their country. We look at issues of master's education, it becomes very difficult. And then you find a lot of people moving out of the country to other countries. So they were looking that if it's possible, we could ensure that we have enough programs, enough attractive programs in the country, so that more of them that go out there would stay inside. Then again, on basic education, their concern was with the fact that we should look at ensuring that we get more young people in schools. And I think it was around a time when we had a very interesting story of young people having to travel long distances to access education. And they feel that these were some of the priority areas that we should look at. We should ensure that we are making available classrooms in communities that young people could get access to education. Yes,
right, so access and affordability to higher education as well as basic. There's a lady here. Right. Please go straight to the point.
Okay, I'm Alfred Godwin Ajaben. My research was in the Volta region. Young people were mostly concerned about inclusion at all sectors of development. And one scenario that they gave, which I think is important, is that for me, I like kinky. So for some reasons, fishes love worms. So if you want to bait a fish, you bait it with a worm. You don't bait a fish with kinky. So development should be informed in the same direction. When you want to develop creating a development in the interest of young people, it should also be by young people. Young people should also be actively engaged. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was a lady in front. Participation. What elephant or umbrella is participation? This morning we'll find out.
Okay, please, my name is Sherifa Osman. I represent AFES Ghana, Koforidua. Okay, my target community was Koforidua and its nearby communities. Some of the issues we identified had to do with education. It's like now we have access to education. It's because of the level of advertisement. But then when someone comes out of school, what happens? The person sits at home, no skills training, nothing. So my target group were just agitating that at least we involve a bit of skills training in our schools. They were speaking of this agriculture, science, and others. At least when the person comes out of school with agricultural skills, they can do something on their own. But at the time we had a symposium with them, the agricultural science was out of the syllabus and it was included in integrated science, like a part of integrated science. So they were just agitating that we make agriculture science stand on its own as a full course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that because of time and because one of our guests would have to excuse us, if you would oblige, we would come to some of the guests because we will still have an opportunity to come back to the larger group. So I would want, first of all, to start with my own Professor Bob Watting. There's obviously a challenge with data and statistics. Who are the youth? Who are the unemployed youth? How many are they? In what areas are they unemployed? Are they even employable? So these are dilemmas we would want for you to clarify for us. Is a youth a term that defines every young person, or they have special needs?
Thank you, Shamima. You are bringing back the question that I used to give you in those days. And I will start by just looking at a phrase in New York policy that about 60% of Ghanaians are below 25 years. Okay, so it's about 60% because the actual figure in 2015 is 56%. And then I looked at 25 years ago, which is 1992, when I entered the university as a first-year student. And now 60% of them have just come to join us. So what will happen the next 25 years? So that shows how the issue is, and we need to confront it. When we talk about youth, who are the youth? We need to put it in perspective. It depends on how you are looking at it and where you are looking at it from. The UN looks at youth as those between 15 and 24. That's the definition of youth from the UN perspective. AU looks at the youth from 15 to 35. Commonwealth looks at the youth from 15 to 29. So we have a lot of organizations that define youth differently. For Ghana, because we are part of AU, we normally consider youth to be those between 15 and 35. And we can classify them into two, those between 15 and 24, I call them the youth, and 25-35, I call them young adults. And these people constitute about 33% of the total population, and we were discussing it in 2015, the labor force survey that Cascade Service conducted. When you do the estimate, it puts Ghana's population at 27.01 million, and a third of that are aged between 15 and 35. So these are the young people. Now, if you put it into unemployment, we also have to be very careful. The definition of unemployment, as given by the ILO, sometimes confuses us because they look at those who are actually looking for jobs. But our labor market is such that many people are indeed jobless. They are not working, and they need to work. But because the facility for them to look for a job is not there, they sit at home. So if you want to go strictly by that definition, you will leave out a lot of people. So when you bring all of them on board, then you have our unemployment rate in Ghana as of 2015 to be about 11.9. So we call them the jobless people, 11.9. If you consider the youth between 15 and 24, they will account for about 20%. And if you break them into education, that is where the problem is. Because young people between 20 and 25 who have graduated from any of our universities, you will look at unemployment as 30.5%. So it's about a third. So young people between 20 and 25 who have a degree, about a third of them are indeed unemployed. So that is how the unemployment situation is. And normally, you look at unemployment rate from gender perspective, the rate is higher among girls or ladies than boys. And those who are even working, you have to also look at the quality of work. And that is why the argument that about 85,000 people have to troop to immigration service looking for a job. You realize that some of them are indeed unemployed, they are looking for a job, but a number of them are working, but the work is as good as nothing. Because you cannot, as I always say, you cannot continue to be unemployed after school for a long time. The only thing that either you tend to be an armed robber or you find something to do. So you find some of these young people who have completed university and polytechnics and so on, or let's say technical universities, doing something. And sometimes they have to go home with 400 Ghana cedis a month. So if you open up and say, come and seek employment in immigration, I mean, if you are employed in the immigration service, you know that you are going to be there till you retire if you don't commit any offense. You are going to be there because that kind of job is what we consider to be sustainable. So because many of these young people from secondary school and tertiary institutions are not looking at any other type of job, but job in the formal sector, because you cannot expect me to finish the university and then go and sell something on the street. That means there was no need for me to even go to school. So all of them are looking at the formal sector as the way to go. So if the formal sector is also not expanding the way it should, and the statistics shows that it's not expanding, the reason is that the formal sector is made up of the public sector and private formal sector. The public sector, that's the government sector, is not the main source of employment because, I mean, you know we have this IMF conditionality, so there are certain areas that we are not employing, with the exception of, let's say, education and health. So the public sector is not employing as it used to be. Private formal sector is also not expanding as it is supposed to expand because of a lot of constraints. So if the formal sector is not expanding enough, but we are having about 437,000 people entering the labor market in 2016, then you should expect that you are going to have excess of these people being unemployed. So the highest number of people, the youth who are unemployed, are mostly those with secondary school education. Secondary school education, that is where the problem is. Graduate unemployment is high, but not as high as those in those with secondary school education. So the dimension is this. Youth unemployment is high. It becomes higher if you extend it to joblessness. The problem is more with those with secondary school education. It's also high among those with tertiary institutions. Those who are even working are also not having what it takes to make them survive, and therefore they will always troop to where they can get. And that is the scenario that we have currently.
Very good picture, is it not? Great. Thank you very much, Professor Bob Watson. So, Dr. Anyidoho, is there crisis in education? Is there a crisis in education? The World Bank, in its 2017 report, is arguing that there's crisis in learning, that quantities and qualities are reducing, and they are worse in sub-Saharan African countries. 1 in 5 children in Africa would have no life skills at all. And also they argue that 2/3 of global wealth is human capital. We've just been given this scenario. What is the educational response? Are our educational institutions building young people to participate effectively in the job market, or are they not?
We do have research that shows that employers complain, and quite often and quite stridently, about the kinds of products that are coming out of particularly tertiary education, but also secondary education, into the job market, and about them not having either the skills or the character for the job market. So if we are thinking of education as one function, I guess, of the educational sector is to create good workers for the jobs that are available, then there seems to be a problem there. And I don't think this is peculiar to the educational system. I think there's a general sense in which we don't link our policies across sectors. So we want to have people who can occupy jobs in the labor market. We don't have dialogue between that sector and the educational sector to find out what kind of education do those people need. We, for instance, say that we need to encourage more young people to go into the agricultural sector. There isn't any dialogue between that sector and the educational sector, or even the employment sector, about how that might work. So there is that problem. The other general problem, I think, is that we need to decide if we are going to make policies that move the country forward, what do we want our educational system to be? I'm going a little broader than saying education is simply supposed to create workers for the existing labor market, right? Perhaps we also need to think about what kind of education will make people able to create jobs themselves, or to even transform the labor market. There's a lot of emphasis, for instance, on how young people don't have particular kinds of skills when they come out of the university. The university will tell you that it's not their job to teach young people skills. It's their job to teach them how to think. Do we want to change the philosophy, the mandate of the university educational system, for instance? If we think that skills are a problem, do we want to turn polytechnics into universities? I think that we just haven't figured out what it is that education should be and what it should do for people. And until we sort that out in our heads, we are going to have this problem of different expectations I had a national service person who complained that she hadn't gotten practical skills in university. For instance, she started working and she didn't know how to operate a photocopier machine. And I'm thinking to myself, is that what we need the university to be doing? So I think we just have to have a conversation about what education should be, whether it's teaching skills, and what level of education and what type of education should do that. Should it be universities? Should it be polytechnics? Do we need to go beyond skills and think about thinking capacity, about character, about morality, and those things? Are they important to us also? So if we talk about a crisis in education, there is the mere fact that young people are finding it more difficult to do basic maths or to read. That's one thing. I think there's a bigger crisis of we just don't know what it is that we want education to do.
Very well. So do you have any ideas? What should our education look like to address especially the unemployment situation, which is really startling?
You want me to make educational policy right now?
Do you have any ideas, any thoughts you might want to share?
I think that when people, my expertise is in higher education. That's where I work and that's where my research is concentrated. I think that if, for instance, you have a university education, that it should teach you to think. And to think, to be innovative, to want to do things for yourself, to be able to improve a situation that you are in. I think that it should teach you character traits like integrity and initiative and a love of country. I think education should be both about increasing the capacity of your mind and enlarging your character. That would be my broad recommendation.
And I think it's a very great point that you make. I'm told that technology and innovation and ideas will be the driving force of the fourth industrial revolution. As we have seen, technology is disrupting everything at rates and speeds previously not seen. So obviously there's a way in which our education should seek to expand the minds of individuals rather than focus on the wealth we have on the ground. How about we really work to expand the depths of our mind, because that is really limitless, is it not? Professor Jampo, let me come to you. You're a political scientist, and this whole conversation about lack of participation of young people in policy, is that really the problem? What kind of participation are we talking about? And are youth able, and do they have the capacity to participate? Do young people know what they want, even?
Well, thank you. Normally I don't like certain when. Okay, I'll sit.
The lecturer in him just showed itself. Feel free.
Well, participation. It is true that we do not have much participation of young people, particularly when it comes to formulating policies that borders on youth interests. Now, over the years, the only source of participation we have involved the youth, in has been to mobilize them as agents of political party support. And so their participation is limited to the area of they being used as voting machines, they being used as foot soldiers, and they being used as agents to foment violent conflict. That is all that we know. And so when you are going to campaign for power, you need the youth. When you get power, the youth do not matter. And even when it comes to formulating policies meant for the youth, we think that politicians or policymakers know better than the youth. But with the greatest of respect, nobody can pretend to understand the challenges confronting young people better than the youth themselves. And so that is... So policies of states and policies geared towards the youth have been shrouded in what one scholar called Bell referred to as adultism, a situation where some older people feel that they know what the youth know. But, I mean, if young people are, look at the way we've crafted our constitution. At 21 years, or at 18, you are wise enough to determine who must lead us. But to lead us yourself, you must be age 40. Does that make sense? And so, look at all the policies. The first national youth policy that was formulated for young people was in 1998. It was an elite prescribed document. E.T. Mensah and Co. prepared it without consulting young people. Well, it suffered the usual challenge of policy abandonment. I mean, we always want to truncate policy. Every government that comes wants to fashion out its own policy. So that was jettisoned when in 2001 you had a new government. Now, the Kufuor administration used all the 8 years saying that, look, the 1998 youth policy was not, so we didn't consult or involve a lot of youth. So yes, they did a lot of work in formulating the 2008 youth policy. The challenge, as indicated, was that they spent all the 8 years consulting. And actually, they came out with a document, the 2008 youth policy. Now, NDC comes to power in 2009, and they say, well, it is not our policy. So they hurriedly put together something. I'm telling you today the reason why Sekou Nkrumah was sacked. You remember he was the coordinator of the National Youth Authority then. He kicked against the fact that the party then wanted to prepare a new youth policy that did not receive much input from young people. And that was how come he was, axed. Then NDC came out with 2010 youth policy without much consultation of young people. And so participation generally in policies, look at the National Youth Employment Program. My colleague here spoke about sustainable jobs. I know how the National Youth Employment Program was crafted. It was a National Youth Security Advisor who went to J.A. Kufuor, told him that, look, young people are not employed. We need to do something about their joblessness because it's a national security threat. Kufuor advised him, go and fashion out something. So he worked with some other people, but not young people, to craft the NYEP. Now, how many of you want to have a job that will last for 2 years and afterwards nobody cares for you? If young people had been consulted, they would have told them that, look, we want a job that will work till we retire. But because they were not consulted. And so participation is very weak. And let me talk about participation briefly or in detail. When we talk about participation, it's not even only about just talking to them. There are 4 main indices of participation. First of all, consult. When you consult, those you are consulting must be able to make meaningful input into, if there's a document or into the process of decision-making. Nooks will tell you, when I was doing my PhD, they will tell you that, well, when they were preparing the National Development Plan or something, National Development Policy Framework, they gave us the huge, voluminous document and told us to submit our input in 2 days. Who can read and make any meaningful input into such a document? So when one is consulted, one must also be able to make meaningful contribution to a decision making. And then third, one must also be able to influence the decision making process. So there are times that they consult you and their attitude is like, you say some, but we have already made up our mind. And so you are unable to influence the process. Now, so consult, make meaningful contribution, and then also be able to influence the process in a manner that reflects your interest. The final indices or index of participation is that after having gone through all the processes, young people must also be able to own the document. Ownership is key in determining participation. You see that there are so many policy blueprints that are supposed to advance the cause of young people, but young people do not own them because they were not consulted, they didn't have the opportunity to make meaningful contribution to the process, and then also they could not influence the process. And so, by extension, they are unable to own. And generally, within our policy endeavors as a country, if the people of the country are unable to own policy prescriptions, such policies are bound to fail. And so participation among young people is lacking. Participation even among the general citizenry. We are not talking about going to vote and going on demonstration or being used as agents to foment violent conflict. We're talking about being made part of a decision that directly affects you. That is lacking. And it is a serious challenge that confronts Ghana. And in our forward march to empowering young people, no nation can survive without empowering its young people. As we strive to empower young people, it is important that we elicit their participation when it comes to decision-making, particularly on those aspects of decision that directly borders on their interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jampo. And I'll definitely come back to you because obviously we don't want a situation where governments take all these beautiful boxes to say, oh, we did this, we did that, and so, oh, there was real participation in the formulation of this policy. Because we have had some form of participation in the formulation of youth policies. There's always been the challenge of commitment to action, to operationalize what is contained in these policies. And it comes back to the purview of the state and government institutions mandated to implement. So you need to respond to that other part of the challenge. Professor Babwatin has to go, but we need to come back to you briefly to help us with some solutions. Do we need to do an audit, a labor audit? Do we need to do an audit of young people, find out what their employability skills are, have all of that data? How do we do that?
One important point that you made in your proposal is capacity building of ministries, departments, and agencies to be able to provide useful, relevant, and adequate data for policy. And I think that is a major point that government needs to take up. You cannot solve a problem if you don't know what the problem is. To be able to solve the problem, you need to know who are unemployed, what skills do they have, what are the issues on the supply side. And you also need to know the kind of jobs that are being created, which people are being created for from the demand side. And that is what is missing in all this conversation. So currently, you will not be able to put your hand on something to show that, well, this is the number of people who are unemployed, and for that matter, the number who are this, who are that. You need to resource state agencies to be able to pick the existing data to tell government the situation. If you take the number of people who leave the university every year, you should be able to capture the kind of programs that they pursued, and it is there. So if it is your vision to be able to know the kind of people you are admitting to the labor market, you need to charge the institutions to be able to come up with the raw data in that manner. Then you organize it to be able to inform policy. And on the part of government, I always find it difficult to understand why we are not able to tell the number of jobs that have been created by a contract that we gave. It's quite interesting because I don't know whether in the labor law I recall it correctly, but all establishments are mandated to send information to the labor department on the number of people that have been engaged within a year, those who retired, those who left because of death, and so on and so forth. So in the formal sector, if all these kinds of data are provided, at the end of the year, you should be able to know the number of people who were engaged because there was a vacancy, not because somebody retired or somebody died. So if somebody retires and you engage somebody, you haven't created any job. This is just a substitution. So if you have all these institutions providing that data, these are the formal sector institutions. Government also employs. Government is able to provide the number of people that they engage every year, not to replace those who are retiring, but the new ones. At the end of every year and in the budget, we should be able to give an indication of the number of people that have been engaged in a sustainable employment. If you want to know the other side, that is where you need to carry out survey. So it comes back to commitment on the part of government. It comes back to investment. And I dare to say that if you take Ghana Statistical Service, which is the institution mandated to provide data for government, I don't think they are well resourced. And we've spoken about this 1,000 times. If the institution that is supposed to provide you statistics and data is not well resourced, you'll not be able to attract the best caliber of people to go there and help you. Normally, when they are doing their surveys and so on, they have to extend some kind of support from the World Bank, from local consultants, and so on and so forth. If you resource them, if you pay them well, you'll be able to get the best brains to be able to get you the data that you have. If you go to advanced countries, those in these areas are paid quite well. They have the resources, they have all it takes to be able to do that. And if you are not able to provide the data, there's no way you can solve the problem that confronts us. But to end, I will just touch on something that my sister spoke about. It is important that when we talk about skill mismatch, which everybody speaks about, and all presidents, Nana, President Kufuor, President Mills, President Mahama, all of them have spoken one way or the other about skill mismatch. But we have to understand what skill mismatch is. In the universities, we have different programs. There are programs that are supposed to be linked directly to the job market. If you are training somebody to become a medical doctor, you cannot train him without linking it to the kind of job he's going to do. If you are training somebody to become a pharmacist, it must be linked to the labor market. If you are training somebody to become an engineer, he needs to work on a machine to be able to be productive. But if you are training somebody in psychology, in economics, in sociology, where is the person going to be? When I was a student, my professor didn't know I was going to become a lecturer, and therefore they would have taught me how to teach. But what they did was to teach me how to think, how to be innovative, how to solve problems. And the issue is to be able to solve problems, when you get to the job market, it doesn't become a new thing. And I interact a lot with employers, and I'm happy Akuya spoke about employers' perspective. When I speak to employers, they tell you when we are employing, like Unilever, like Nestle Ghana Limited, we're not looking at your finance, we are not looking at your economics, we are looking at how you can think. And therefore, when Unilever is employing, and I remember in 1996, when we finished our first degree, they wanted to recruit just about 3 people. And what they did was that they advertised that everybody who had at least upper should apply, and almost all of us applied. And they started by doing aptitude test to see how you think. So the aptitude test from another point to the other, and so on. And eventually, they picked only 3 because they needed to know the best. Aptitude test is to test your thinking ability. So if you are talking about Unilever, how they employ, it means that our teaching must look at thinking. But in our education system, from basic level to secondary to tertiary, it's about how to pass examination. And if it's about how to pass examination, it's not about how to think. And if we teach how to think from the basic, for instance, from class 1 to class 4, can we concentrate on mathematics, arithmetic, how to read and write? And if the child is able to read and write and solve simple arithmetic problem, if you go to BC and he reads and understands, he'll be able to answer the question. But most of us, and here I'm talking about the villages, BC, many of them cannot even read before they can even understand the question. So the basic is a problem. You go to India, you go to China, they emphasize mathematics. That is why GMAT, GRE, to go and do your PhD in all these big institutions, you see Chinese, you see Indians, because that is where the emphasis is. And if you emphasize mathematics, you are emphasizing what? Thinking. But even our teachers, how they even teach mathematics, makes all of us run away. So it means that we haven't actually looked at the problem. So before the person gets to the university, is that where you are going to teach the person how to think? And therefore, if you try to give a question that will make the student think, you are the worst lecturer that he has come across with. So we have to look at education as a holistic thing, from the basic to the highest level, and make sure children that we are teaching are able to think and be innovative, so that when we are looking at the next 5 years, I'm sure drones that we are talking about didn't exist in the last 4 years. When we were students in the 90s, I never thought of mobile phone. And therefore, as a young person, I didn't know what mobile phone is, but now it's a mobile phone. Things have changed. So because of that, we don't have to look at, skill mismatch. You have to train the person straight to the labor market. You have to train the person how to think, so that when things change in 2 years, 3 years, the person will be able to adapt. And I will end by quoting what Mr. J.H. Mensah told me in 2004, When I made a presentation at Golden Tulip to talk about skill mismatch, saying that we have to look at the demand side, and therefore we have to look at the labor market and so on. As a young person then, he looked at me and said, you, these young people, you are very enthusiastic. Yes, linking it to the labor market, I don't disagree with you, but the best way to get people employed is to teach them how to think, so that they will be able to adapt to every situation when the situation changes. That is what I will leave with you.
Thank you very much. We really wish we could have him, not so, but national duty beckons, and we would excuse you, but say very big thank you for your great insights this morning on this subject matter. Many thanks, Professor Bob Boateng. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Right, so, Nanekwa, yes to you before I come quickly to our last panelist on the...
I wanted to just add on to what William said about looking at the statistics, trying to get information about where young people are going when they leave school, what kind of jobs they are doing, how long they are unemployed for, and so on and so forth. I think it's important not just to find out, are they working or are they not working, what sectors are they working in. It's not just a matter of working, it's a matter also of what kind of work they are doing. It's clear to us that we don't want young people who have secondary school education or tertiary education to be in the informal sector. Okay. We want them in the formal sector. But once they get in there, we think then they are fine because they have good jobs. But now there are jobs that are described as precarious jobs, or if you like, informal, formal jobs. And you can think of them. You have university graduates who get contract work in a bank. It seems to be a formal job. After all, they wear a nice shirt or suit and go into an air-conditioned space and they are working. But there's no security there. They don't have work benefits and so on and so forth. So we need to look at even the shrinking formal sector that we have. The jobs are becoming increasingly insecure. They are becoming bereft of certain benefits that you would expect to accompany formal jobs. So I think that's something that we need to be paying attention to. It's not just happening in Ghana, it's happening globally. So we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back if people get pushed into the formal sector. We need to be paying attention to the kinds of jobs that are being created and the kind of jobs that people are working in. And then secondly, we need to pay attention to how young people get jobs, so how they transition from school into the job market. The evidence is that increasingly the transition is, well, if you like, it's not linear. The expectation is you go to school, you get into the job market, you go on with the rest of your life, you know, rent a house maybe, start a family. Increasingly, we are seeing that it's kind of circular. You try and enter the job market, maybe you do something, you're a little underemployed, then you think, maybe I should go back to school and get a master's degree. Maybe that will help me. So you sort of circle around. You can't quite enter it securely and move on with your life. So that's happening. The second thing is that transition is becoming more and more delayed. You don't finish school and immediately find a job. You know, you are, somebody has called youth in Africa now, it's a period of waithood. You are waiting to enter into full adult status because you don't have the economic and other resources to take on adults' lives and responsibilities. And then it's also becoming more individualized. Everybody sort of has to work out their own salvation with fear and trembling, you know. You're not moving as a cohort into the job market. Some people get in, some people are behind. Everybody is sort of trying to do their own movements to get into the job market. So the transition from school into work, which we imagine is straightforward because we are encouraged to go to school. Once you go into school, but you'll get a job. I mean, it's assumed that it's going to be that automatic, that easy. But that's not happening, and that creates a lot of frustration. It creates a lot of uncertainty, people trying to do all kinds of things to secure themselves. So beyond counting the numbers, seeing who has entered, who has gotten a job and who hasn't, we need to be looking, researching into the experience of trying to get into the job market, whether people have the skills and the knowledge to be able to navigate that transition into jobs. And when they get into the jobs, what kinds of jobs are they doing? And are they jobs that can secure them for their futures? That's very important.
Right. Great insights. And so therefore, with all of these germane issues that are coming up, what is a national youth policy response to it? What's the case for a national youth policy? Will it address some of these issues coming up? We'll be getting into that. Let me now introduce Mrs. Teodoro Williams, Auntie. She's the programs manager at FOSDA, which is the Foundation for Security and Development in Africa. They work directly with youth groups. And if you're just joining us, you're live on 3FM, 92.7 FM. It is the youth policy dialogue happening at the British Council Hall here in Accra. It's organized by the Youth Empowerment Synergy with support of Voices of the Youth as well as Commonwealth Foundation. So coming to you, Mrs. Theodora, what are the young people saying to you when you're dealing with them directly? What is the reality on the ground? Are we assuming we know their problems? What do they say?
Thank you, Shemima, and good morning to everybody. Before I answer your question, I want to give a typical example of our educational system helping us to think. When I was doing my master's at the University of Ghana, Professor Jampo was my lecturer. And I remember when we had one of our exams, he taught me strategic management or planning. And by the time we finished the exam, and when I got back to my hostel, our results were out. It was like in a few hours, you know. And when we probed him to find out how he did it, he didn't want to tell us the secret, but he basically, I think, looked at your introduction, maybe some middle portion, and your conclusion. And from there, he could determine how you're thinking. He doesn't have to see your eyes and your dots and to know whether you got everything he taught you in the lecture room. But at least from your introduction and your conclusion, he can see that you got what he taught you. You read more, and you can, think and express yourself. And I think that's what we run away from with most lecturers. And we think, and most of my colleagues who didn't pass were like, he didn't do well, he should have read everything. But, well, the answer is at the beginning and at the end. And yes, young people are, from our interaction with them, we've been working with them for the past 5 years. And there is a lot of frustration among young people, especially, I think we've had a lot of participation in here. And like Prof said, we think we know what young people are thinking or what they should have or what is good for them or what is not good for them. But the reality is, the politicians cannot know better than they themselves. And we see that in all the policies. We see that in the current national youth policy, its implementation. And I'm very sure, even if we attempted to implement it, it might not succeed because most of the things in there do not represent the views of the young people. I was talking to you earlier about youth employment and how we seek to train young people, for instance, in hairdressing, young people from northern region or typical areas like that where women mostly cover their hair. And you train them in the northern region on hairdressing. Who is going to patronize their services, for instance? And so you realize that when young people don't participate in the decision that concern them, is bound to fail because they don't own the process, they don't own the decisions that come out, and so they can't really participate in it and also give up their best. So there is a lot of frustration among young people, and in our work with them over the past 5 years, I have seen young people who have become so interested in nation building, who have become so enthusiastic in wanting to participate or wanting to give their views, wanting to, one way or the other, get their voices heard on a decision table. And so we can't assume that they don't know. Like Prof said earlier, normally, it's a culture. It's a culture that, look, young people are violent, young people don't know anything, And that's how we treat them at home. They don't have a voice. And we've translated that into politics, into decision making. And so there is no systemized space for young people to contribute. And that's affecting how young people contribute to decision making. So there's a lot of frustration in the system, but as civil society, we are working gradually to bring them up. One of the big issues for us in civil society is that young people don't have a unified front. Political parties have managed very well to divide the front of young people. And so you see NDC youth, you see MPP youth, you see this youth and that youth. And whenever you hear them talking, it's about politics. It's about demanding one state's facility or the other, public toilets or things like that, youth for this, youth for that. But when it comes to the real issues, real developmental issues, when it comes to education, when it comes to employment, when it comes to even corruption, young people are very silent. Why? Because they don't have a unified front. And that's one of the things that we are fighting for, to get young people to have a unified front. And luckily, it is captured in the current, it's kind of captured in the current National Youth Authority Act to have what we call the Ghana Youth Federation. And it will come. We're working hard towards it to have a very unified front for young people to express their views. And that might systemize the system a bit to get the voice of young people heard.
But can you say that, and I'm coming to the audience now, can we say that youth issues are homogeneous? How about, issues of gender? How about issues of the disabled? How about issues of the disenfranchised? Are we thinking and assuming that young people have homogeneous problems which with one stroke of a brush can be solved? And what do we want? Do we want to participate, or we actually want action that sees results and improve our lives? So we're coming to take a few of your comments at this time. Then we'll come back to our panelists and wrap up. What are your thoughts about the conversation so far? What great ideas do you have? What must governments do as soon as possible to ensure that these proposals that are contained in the youth policy document, the voices of the youth, find expression in policy documents of government, in laws, in budget allocations? Very, very critical. Today, we're expecting to have had the Minister of Youth and Sports. He's absent. What does that tell us about the commitment of governments to youth issues? What are you willing to do as young people to get the attention that you most definitely deserve? So, yes, I see a few hands. I'll take 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me just do participation there. 1, 2, 3. Another woman. To the point, Chris, so we can have as many views as possible.
Thank you very much. My name is Blaze. I'm coming from the house.
Are you unemployed or self-employed? Which one are you?
I'm unemployed. Anyway, the point I want to make is that the issue of youth is defined contextually. Every organization decides how to define who a youth is in respect of their situation. So, for instance, for me, even the panelists sitting there are youth. For me, the president is not a youth. The Speaker of Parliament is not a youth. The Chief Justice is not a youth. So, immediately, if you look at those taking decisions for the country, there is no youth representation. And it is born out of a certain orientation of the Ghanaian, a certain paternalistic attitude that the youth are an extension of our parents. That when you see the youth, they are an extension of our parents. So therefore, our parents can take decisions on our behalf. But it is not the case. The youth are an extension of existence, not an extension of essence. Because if you look at the youth, what we want is essentially different from what the adults want.
So what do you want?
So what I want is that the youth are given the opportunity to make direct decisions. The youth want change. We don't want to maintain the status quo. If you see the adults are maintaining the status quo. We want to use our energy to change the status quo, to exploit. You should exploit our energy in changing the status quo rather than maintaining the...
Right. So you want opportunity to allow your creative juices to flow. Coming from the house, that's some deep thinking.
Good morning. I'm Arthur from UDS Navrongo campus. And I loved Professor Jampo's presentation about how the youth is being used as foot soldiers and all. And our view on politics right now, I believe that the youth is not well represented in government. The Ministry of Youth and Sport is only an acronym. I want to put it that way, an acronym for something they want to call up so that they can tell the whole world that indeed they are representing the youth in government or in parliament. How do we have Ministry for Youth and Sports? Is it that the youth are meant for sports, or is it that we are meant to be playing football for the country? So there should be a particular ministry, a ministry that represents solely the youth. The youth is what empowers the whole nation. Without the youth, we don't have a nation. So if we have Ministry of Youth and Sports, then some monies that are supposed to be used to empower the youth is going to be shared between youth and sports. And how are we going to develop as a nation and a youth group?
Right. Brilliant input. So we want a dedicated ministry for youth, in charge of youth affairs and all of its myriad problems, and adequate budgetary allocation. Of course, youth issues are cross-cutting as well. So that's where the proposal to have some collaboration so there's no redundancy and duplication of efforts. Yes, madam.
Yeah, thank you, Shamima. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Yeah, so whilst we are really looking at opportunities for the youth, it's begging to say that the opportunities are not just enough to be created. I think really the policy response should be that jobs that are existing should be looked into. You know, so it should be a really thought-through policy to say that we are going to look into how young people are being treated at their workplace. Okay? Are the jobs they are having enough in terms of contracts, in terms of pay, in terms of conditions, so that this whole issue of working poor can be solved. But also, it also begs on us as young people to take it up on ourselves to continuously learn. Yes. Because lifelong learning, that is really the voluntary thing of pursuing knowledge whenever, wherever, is critical in the sense that if the education that we are all now talking about does not provide you with that critical thinking, does not provide you with that skills training that you so want, and you yourself positioned yourself to do lifelong learning, you'll be competitive in all sense because you would acquire, you make efforts on your own to acquire the knowledge that you need at any time to pursue whatever opportunities that exist. So I would really like to encourage young people here today to pursue lifelong learning.
Absolutely. So we don't want young people to have an entitlement mentality. Yes, you have rights, but you also have responsibilities. And in this information and technological age, the world is not waiting for you, really. And people are taking charge of their destinies. They are learning. There's so much information you can learn from. So what are you doing? What's going to be your personal contribution to your personal welfare and advance? That's the challenge my sister is throwing to us this morning.
My name is Amna Koko. I'm a teaching assistant at the University of Cape Coast. Samima, you just read my mind. I just completed UCC, and now I'm sort of teaching most of them. And when it comes to the copy and paste stuff, we are not being allowed to think, or we the students have come to accept that. And nowadays, people don't even stand up for what they believe in and what they really want. We just say it, casually. But we don't stand up to always consistently push for what we actually want. The copy and paste system is not helping people. Now we have mobile phones, we have access to internet. There are so many examples of things that we want to see in Ghana all over the world. We want our examinations to be about those things that makes us brainstorm, try to create modules that will actually work for us. So we are complaining the education is not doesn't make us think a lot, whatever. But we've accepted it. Everybody just wants to get grades in examination. I don't mind getting a D, but I've gone for a lot of internships, and wherever I go, I can stand up and talk about what I'm studying. Students don't care about that again. They just want to pass exams. You don't even want to go for internships. You know, you want to come out as a bachelor of what? How many internships have you gone out to do yourself? And even now, my department, for instance, it's compulsory for you to go for internship. But when they even go, you don't allow yourself to think, to ask the right questions. You just go and use the Wi-Fi at the company. You don't talk to the leaders. You know, what were the challenges that you faced? What differently are you doing that you compare to your YouTube videos and other things? We are talking we want change, but we don't really want it. You know, we've been spoon-fed all along, and stupidly, some people too are over-enjoying the spoon-feeding, and they are not fighting and standing up to really change things for themselves. There are lots of people, they've not gone through half of any challenges, and they were born poor, they are enjoying being poor, and they are not really encountering any challenge. There are countries, there's always war, there's always this, that. And the youth are doing marvelous things. Ghana, what really happens here? You know, and I don't know what to say, but I think you get where I'm coming from.
I do. I think this is a great input. She's just lifted a mirror to the other side of the story, and we need to confront it and accept it. Young people are not pushing themselves enough. We can do more. I was reading before coming here, and I was told that if you were born in the 80s, like me, right, in sub-Saharan Africa, only 12% of us, those born in the 80s, have had education higher than our parents. Do you know what the figure is in parts of Asia? 80%. So of our generation, only 12% of us have had an education higher than that of our parents, as compared to 80% of Asians having an education higher than that. And we are competing at the global level. Really? Really? Yes.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Edward Nikwe Ashi from Valley View University. Last week also, the government said something about youth going into agriculture. But now you could move closer to Dodowa, Kantamanso, and the lands are being sold to real estate. Seriously. And Galamsey too is in flux. And I'm just wondering why youth being encouraged to go into agriculture and lands are being sold to real estate. And government agencies are aware of that. So what are we doing about that? Thank you very much. Great input.
The disconnect in policy. So food for thought. If anybody is listening, why?
What we are doing here would come to naught if we don't see ourselves as one constituency. You are youth, whether NDC or MPP. Let us all come together, or CPP, or all other parties. Let us all come together and ensure that irrespective of our partisan coloration, we are one. And let us appreciate the fact that nobody would mind us until we ourselves have the sense of agency in demanding what we want. It is only when we do this that the politicians would sit up.
Thank you. Well, there's a saying that you don't expect voluntary unselfishness from those that wield power. Sometimes you need to be radical in demanding that which is rightly yours, but then also be prepared. Prepare to be able to do the right thing. Right, so let's come to you, Mrs. Auntie. You're wrapping up comments. What needs to be done?
In fact, when they talk about participation, I talk about Accra and maybe Kumasi or maybe Koforidua. But there is so much more, many more youth out there that we have to reach out to. And if we here fail to use the opportunities that are available to us to participate, then forget about those in the rural areas.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Auntie. And Dr. Anyido, where is the place of policy in all of this? Does it start and end with policy? Do we need more than just to have beautiful policies?
I think it's really important to actually hear young people's voices, not filtered through older persons. Which brings me to this policy, which I read with great interest. And as I was reading it, it's definitely broader, wider, it covers more dimensions of young people's lives than the current policy that we have. But I didn't hear young people's voices because it had been filtered through, I guess, consultants. Young people don't talk like technocrats, they don't talk like academics. I would have liked to hear, I would have liked to read something that sounds like these are young people speaking, because part of the aim of this also is to make sure that young people can take ownership of it, can read it, it can be widely distributed, and they can feel like, and it's something that we want to do more often, even if it's not around a policy per se, but just to sit down and talk about young people's issue. And I suggest that next time we have more young people up here and perhaps us sitting down there and taking notes.
Very well. Many thanks.